Hello everyone, I'm Declan McClintock, and this is a case study of Stuffed, which is my MSU Game Development Capstone project. The purpose of this video is to break down Stuffed from the makeup of the team involved, the progression of the project, and the processes involved. This video will also end with a little bit about what to expect if you go through the Game Development minor at MSU. Let's watch the game's trailer before we get started. So obviously, the game you just saw wasn't made by a single person. It took an entire team to create Stuffed. For our project, we had 9 core team members who made up the programming, art, and design teams. Additionally, we had 4 contract workers assisting us and 1 industry mentor. So in total, 14 people, plus help from playtesters and other mentors, worked to create Stuffed. On our programming team, we had myself working as the programming lead and the programmer for controls, camera, and main character animation playback. We had Zishun Wang handling all of our AI for our enemy interactions. And we had Austin McGee handling our UI code and enemy animations. On our art team, we had Jamie Edmondson as our art lead and character modeler. We had Aixing Chen creating all of our character animations. We had Riker Morningstar making our props. And we had Austin Widmeyer creating our visual effects. Lastly, for our core team, we have our designers. Jared Pennington acting as the design lead, and Cameron Birch as a level designer. In total, our core team is 9 people, and this is about the largest team size you will reach by the end of the Game Dev minor at MSU. Our contract team members are extra help we enlisted to work on our project that weren't included on the main team when we started. Our sound team included Emily Mitchell and Bing-Kun Han, who created our sound effects and sound design, and Christian Colo, who composed the background music you hear in the game. Our final contract team member was Darlene Sobus, who created our UI art. Finally, we have our industry mentor. Every team in the Game Development Capstone has an industry mentor to give them feedback. Ours was Shane McCloskey, a designer at Insomniac Games and an incredible asset to the project. Now, we are going to go through the entire project progression. First, we will talk about getting to know the team. Next, brainstorming, developing long-term plans, week-long sprints and weekly meetings, playtesting, the first playable, alpha, beta, and finally, the final release. The first step in our project progression is getting to know the team. This is very important to a project's success, especially for those in a leadership position. Meeting people well makes collaboration smoother. Building trust makes it easier to have important discussions and difficult discussions, which we will talk about later. And good communication is vitally important to a team's success. That last point is something I say very often, and if you take anything away from this video, it should be how important good communication skills are. fact, I'm going to say it again. Good communication is really important. Communication skills are the most important skill set when working with a team. They are even more important when you're acting in a leadership capacity, since you have to bridge gaps between your team members. Another important point to make here is that if a conversation is going to be difficult to have, it is probably vitally important to have that conversation sooner rather than later. Most problems that require communication to solve will not resolve themselves. I mentioned earlier how we had contract workers and help beyond our core team. Early on in our project, we recognized that our core team lacked audio skills. Because of this, I reached out to composers in the College of Music through contacts in Men's Glee Club. We ended up acquiring the help of 3 talented composers, although 2 ended up only making sound effects. I'll take another moment here and emphasize again how important good communication skills are. If our team never exercised our communication skills and networking abilities, we never would have had sound for our game. One thing you should be considering when designing and producing games is the capabilities of your team and the requirements of your project. If your team does not match your project's requirements, you either need to pick a different project or build onto your team by asking for help. This leads us into brainstorming. Brainstorming is the process of coming up with new project ideas. It is often useful to start brainstorming with some constraints in mind to give you a starting point for your ideas. For our project, we brainstormed around the constraints of our industry partners' skill set, the skill sets of our programming, art, and design teams, and our time constraints. Initially, we brainstormed with smaller subsets of these constraints and added more over time, so we could have more ideas to build off of, but would eventually trend towards projects we expected to fit well. Eventually, we settled on a 3D platformer with a prop to allow special movements. Coming up with new ideas and being innovative is difficult, and as I've already discussed, having constraints can make brainstorming more effective. Constraints give you a starting point to build from, so you don't get lost in the infinite realm of possibilities. Once you're done brainstorming, you should pick an idea that best fits your team. Now we are going to talk about developing long-term plans. For Stuffed, we had 16 weeks to make the game, so we constructed a roadmap for every 3 weeks of the semester. This was then broken down into what could potentially be done each week. Then, every week, the entire plan was adjusted in accordance with the team's progress. We made bigger changes and cuts at the 3-week milestones. When making long-term plans like this, it's important to remember the cliché that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Literally anything can happen to cause the plan to fall apart. You could be wrong in your initial estimates, a team member might get injured, and so on. The important thing to remember is that no plan is set in stone. Adjustments can be made at any point, and you should be iteratively changing your plan the same way you are iteratively changing your game. In this planning stage, we also made green, yellow, and red light goals. All of these change throughout the project's timeline, so remember that no plan is set in stone. But initially we planned for our final game to include all umbrella functions, basically the core controls of the player, 3 bosses with one of those being a final boss, gated progression in an open world setting, a well-polished character controller and camera, and a 2-floor house level design that included that gated progression. Our yellow light goals included story elements and extra rooms in the house. Our red light goals included cutscenes and voice acting, as well as special collectibles and cosmetic changes. From watching the trailer, you can already tell that these initial goals were not all met, but the game still came out in a good place. This is again because game design development is an iterative process, and the game will change over its development right up until release. I mentioned how not all of our initial goals were met. This goes right into making cuts and readjusting. After our first playable milestone, which was 6 weeks into development, we had to make cuts. We cut down to only having 3 levels and a single boss with no hub world. Again, game design development is an iterative process, and changes and cuts will have to be made. I mentioned earlier having difficult conversations. We had to cut a boss at this point that was being worked on during the first 6 weeks from the game. It was difficult to have this conversation about cutting someone's work but the cut was necessary, and the team and the person who worked on the boss handled it very well because we took the time to have that conversation. Next, I'm going to talk about our week-long sprints and weekly meetings. Breaking up work into week-long chunks makes it more manageable, and every week we had several meetings to help with this. These meetings included a mentor meeting, sub-team meetings for each discipline, a team lead meeting, and a full team meeting. The mentor meeting let us update our mentor on our progress and let us receive valuable feedback and guidance. The sub-team meetings allowed the programming, art, and design teams to manage their individual schedules. The team lead meeting let the leads coordinate on the collective direction of the project and make adjustments. And the full team meeting gave us time to work together as a team and address team-wide issues. I'll reiterate again, communication is very important, and keeping everyone on the same page maximizes efficiency. I'm going to take a second now to talk about management and leadership. Good management makes things run smoothly, and a good leader or manager needs to ensure that the needs of those they are leading or managing are met. This means, again, that communication is important, and as a leader, you should seek to understand before making decisions. It's important to remember that everyone on the team is their own individual person and will see every issue and interaction from a different perspective. As a leader or manager, you bridge the gaps between these perspectives and try to bring people together. Bad management, of course, makes things run slower, and people who are not being taken care of produce worse work at a slower rate. Next, I want to talk about analysis and synthesis. Analysis is the process of breaking down a problem into its parts. Synthesis is the combining of the solutions to those parts into a solution to the original problem. In Stuffed, we regularly did analysis and synthesis to break down problems and get as much done as possible. Breaking down problems this way makes them easier to approach and makes it easier to track progress. Speaking of tracking progress, we use Trello to organize tasks and facilitate workflow. We broke down the game and its parts into smaller and smaller tasks until we had things that could be completed in at most 8 hours or so of work. With that breakdown, it was easy to use Trello to assign tasks to individuals on the team, as well as maintain a backlog of tasks to do next. If at any point someone was ahead on work, they could then pull the next task from the backlog. Of course, we also did playtesting. Playtesting is very important to ensuring the game is going in a good direction. Our team did playtesting every week, and the programming team did playtesting every day to help with iterations on the game's controls. External playtesting was done in and out of class by other students, our mentor, and even my 6-year-old cousin. The feedback from these playtests was important in discovering what did and did not work in the game, and the results from playtesting provided guidance for new changes to make. 6 weeks into the project, we had our first playable milestone. So our first playable, obviously still not the finished product, but it was viable, and even before that milestone, we had an MVP. An MVP is a minimum viable product, or a product that can still be used for its intended purpose, even though it is not yet complete. You should always want to have your game in a playable state. This means that at any point in development, you can playtest, which means you can get feedback on any part of the game, which means you can constantly improve any aspect of it. Our initial MVP included a capsule and some boxes to represent the player and the umbrella. That leads me into mechanics and programming. One thing you might have noticed is that at each stage of the project, the mechanics don't seem to change a lot. The feedback we received for most of the mechanics made for subtle changes, such as tweaks to the camera. I should still emphasize, however, that mechanics are the core of the game, and we made many changes throughout the project as we got feedback. As far as designing our mechanics, we started with the metrics level, which incorporates all possible actions the player can take. This level let us play test and develop mechanics at a much faster rate. The core mechanics of any game should be fun on their own, and then supported by everything else to really make them shine. 9 weeks into the class, we have our alpha build of the game. At each of these milestones I've been mentioning, including the alpha milestone you just saw the demo for, we gave presentations. When presenting, you should always consider your audience, what they already know, and what they do not know. You should fill in what they do not know and not repeat back to them what they already know. You should know the goals of your presentation and design around those. You should always speak up to fill the room you're presenting in. You should have demo videos as backups to or in place of live demos. Live demos are subject to more technical issues, and good live demos require more preparation. And of course, you should always be excited to present your game. As far as our art pipeline goes, it starts with planning, which includes concept art, then modeling, unwrapping the models, rigging the models, texturing the models, then animating the rigged models, and finally, implementing the completed art into the game. 12 weeks into the class, we have our beta build ready. I should note that throughout the many weeks of this project, we made a push to ensure everyone was taking care of themselves. Taking care of yourself is the top priority, and I don't mean you should be being greedy and only thinking about yourself. What I mean is that it is important to remember that humans work best when they are happy, which includes you. So you need to make sure that you take care of yourself both physically and mentally. Be sure to eat food and drink water, get the sleep you need, and you should never trade sleep in to spend more time working. I know most of you probably feel like you can't afford time to sleep, but trust me, your brain runs better on sleep. Again, if you're in a leadership position, you need to be mindful of people's needs and trying to ensure that they're met. This, of course, leads us into the inevitable discussion on crunch. In Stuffed, we really only had one night of crunch. This was slightly before the final release because we really wanted things to be perfect and we really wanted to make sure everything worked. Our careful planning and cutting allowed us to not have to crunch to complete our game the way other teams had to, and it generally left us with the most cohesively polished product. Crunch generally is caused by a failure in management to adequately assess the time it takes to complete tasks or not adjust plans in accordance with changing team needs, dynamics, or work velocity. If you are in a leadership or management role, avoiding crunch is one of your jobs. This leads us into the final release and our post-mortem demo video. One of the last two notes I want to make is the importance of audio. At their core, games are about mechanics. The interactivity between the player and the game is what makes games unique from other media. But audio, art, aesthetics, visual effects, and so on all exist to support the mechanics. Without them, the mechanics become more flat and less interesting. The background music in Stuffed was designed to fit the atmosphere of each level, and the sound effects were adjusted to fit their associated mechanics to make them more rewarding. The last point I want to make is about promotional materials. If you ever take on releasing a game and you want many people to play it, you need them to also know about it first. Promotional materials can help with this. While we only made our poster, after our game's release, several YouTubers picked up the game and made videos of it. You could also consider spreading word about the game on social media, which our team also did. As of the time of making this video, Stuffed's Game Jolt page has been viewed approximately 3,400 times. If you continue with the game development program at MSU, a game such as Stuffed would be the final product you work on. Leading up to that final project, however, you will also have many smaller projects to work on, including the smaller one-person projects you are working on now if you're in ComArts 117. Here are some screenshots of what mine looked like when I was going through the program. In the future classes before Capstone, the projects increase in scope and in team size. Here are a few screenshots from ones I worked on. You can find most of them on Game Jolt if you are curious, and you will see that the level of quality varies between the projects. Not every game you work on is going to be perfect or even a portfolio piece. So I hope you all found that useful or at the very least interesting. If you have further questions and are in the class, please ask them on the Piazza page.